go begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. All right, so tonight, like I said, we're looking at the last chapter, and in this, Paul kind of just shifts away. You remember chapter 15, where he had talked, just great, and it ended up with on a high note of, we're overcomers and all that. And then now he gets to chapter 16, and he says, oh, and by the way, concerning the collection of the collection for the Kedoshim, the saints, as I directed Messiah's communities in Galatia, you do likewise. On the first day of the week, let each of you set something aside, saving up whatever is gained, so no collections take place when I come. All right, so the reasons behind Paul's wanting to take up his fundraising activities were there's several reasons. That it had been strongly recommended at the council in Jerusalem. You remember that was when they talked about salvation of the Gentiles and what there was required. That was the Council of Jerusalem, and so it was recommended that the churches or the groups outside of Jerusalem would contribute to the welfare of the saints in Jerusalem, because they were really they were under the gun in lots of ways. Number two, it was follows on with that. It was a drastic problem for the saints in Jerusalem, because there were lots of persecutions. You remember that Stephen was martyred, and then that left, just in many ways, it was just open season on the believers. And there were a lot of people that were having trouble with the idea of someone declaring and worshiping someone and saying he was the Messiah. And so also during that time, they were kind of living, you remember that everybody just kind of pooled their money, and they sold everything and they pooled their money, and it was kind of like a socialist state in many ways, where everyone just lived, they put in whatever. And the problem with that is that it never works for very long. And today we would call it socialism or communism or something, where everybody put what do they say? It's the from those who have for those who need, or something like that. Something along those lines. And it just doesn't work, because people then, if they figure they're going to get taken care of no matter what they do, then they're not going to do anything. And so it didn't work that way in Jerusalem either. I mean, that's just eventually, instead of everybody having enough, no one had enough. And so that's why they were in poverty in many ways. And so you don't like to think of the early body of Messiah, the early church, as it were, to being socialist or communist even, but that's in reality, that's what it was. And it failed miserably, and it always does. So anyway, there's another reason that Paul was taking up this money, was that Paul was trying to soften the prejudices of the Jewish people, the Jewish Christians, the Jewish believers, against their Gentile brethren, and there was some, some head-to-head stuff there with the Jewish believers, because some of them thought that the Gentiles should, oh man, they got to be circumcised and they got to turn into a Jew before they can be a believer. And so there was still some of that. And then another reason was he was trying to demonstrate unity within the body of Messiah, that if these largely Gentile congregations would participate in the welfare and the upkeep of the Jewish people in Jerusalem, then it would show some unity to all. And it's kind of a way of showing these scattered believers wherever they were in the world, that they were not merely members of that local congregation, as it were, that small little congregation, but they were members of a larger body of believers. It was more universal. And so also it was a way of getting the word out and stressing that as believers we should be generous and giving. And so giving is basically a vital doctrine within the body of Messiah, the Christians, if you use that term. And so it was also an example of what believers are supposed to do when they get saved. They're not supposed to get, they don't become a believer and then from then on it's, well, because you're a believer, God's just going to take care of you and you deserve this or that or the other, and the prosperity doctrine or something. Well, no, that was never taught in those days. And this was an example of what the believer should be doing, was to helping other believers wherever they are in the world. And finally, it was a way of just strengthening the faith of the believers. The givers can see that by their gifts other people were lifted up and survived, and so it was just a good thing for them to do. And so we see though that there's no recorded instruction whereby Paul told the Galatians, in the book of Galatians, there's no instructions as to the requirement or the instructions on how to give, where to give, all of that. And so that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It just means that it wasn't recorded in the book of Galatians. That's all. So, and then another thing I wanted to point out in those two verses is it talks about first day, and that first day, that is, of course, Sunday, and that in many ways kind of points to the idea that these early believers would actually meet on Sunday rather than on Shabbat. And so I know that just rankles some people within the Messianic movement that, no, these people were Jews and they were meeting on Shabbat. But I think there's a lot of evidence that says no, they were already starting to meet on the first day, as well as many were still going to the synagogue on Saturday because they were Jew. But what about the Gentiles that, okay, maybe they were not really into Jewish worship and they would not fit in the synagogue, but they could fit in a home study group or a home fellowship group, and we'll talk about that later on in the chapter. So there is a good amount of evidence that these people were actually meeting on Sunday, and perhaps many of them as well on Saturday, on Shabbat. And so the language of the verses, basically it was, they were not charged dues as such, that everybody has to pay $50, or whatever. It was this whatever you can give as what you from what you earn, because a lot of these people, some of these people were actually slaves. They were not free men. They weren't earning a wage as such. They were part of a household or something where they were slaves. They didn't have any wages. They had room and board, and they worked, and so they really had no reward, no extra money that they could give. And so another thing that Paul had said, every first day of the week, every Sunday you get together and you take the offering, whatever it is, it's small or great, whatever that you have, go ahead and take it at that point. Now he's there's a motive to his madness there, in that he figured that if they did this over the long term, little by little, that they would have a much greater offering for the people in Jerusalem, the poor people in Jerusalem, if they did it over over a long period of time. And he's probably right that if he had gone to the Corinthian congregation there on his third missionary journey, if he had gone there then and says, okay, we're going to take up a collection for the saints in Jerusalem, and everybody said, okay, well, here I got $5, and somebody else, well, I got this, that, and the other, that offering would have been much less than if they had taken it over a long term. And people would have had more of an opportunity to participate in the long run, because sometimes if they took up the offering just one time, then somebody would say, oh man, I just had to pay my income tax, so I don't have any money left until another payday or so. And whatever, I had this my rock that we grind wheat and corn on broke, and I had to buy a new one for the wife, and so that cost a lot of money. So over the long term, he would have had more of a gift for the poor people in Jerusalem. So any comments or questions on that? All right. So then whenever, going ahead on verse 3, then whenever I arrive, I will send whomever you approve with letters of introduction to carry your gift to Jerusalem. If it is advisable for me to go also, they will go with me. All right. So here Paul, he says a letter of introduction. Now I'm sure he was expecting a pretty large gift by the time he finally gets there, and then that'll be might be another 6 months or a year before he actually gets there. And so he would have a sizable gift. And how did they shift money around from one place to the other? Well, you carried it around. You would stick it in a bag, and you would disguise it as whatever, and you would travel with it, so that that's the only way. There was no banking system to where you could contact one bank and they would say, oh yeah, we got the funds here, you can take it out there. That didn't happen. So you had to physically carry all of the funds back to Jerusalem. And so part of the early day features, how they did that was that they would have these letters of introduction or letters of authorization or whatever, that they could carry that money. Of course, it's not something that you would go and flaunt, because you don't want anybody to know that you're carrying money, because then that just makes you a target. Some of my ancestors who would drive cattle from down in Texas all the way up to Colorado or wherever, and they would get the money for the cattle, and then they would have to carry that money, sizable amount of money actually, back from Colorado, Montana, wherever they were, New Mexico, back to the area around Weatherford, Texas. And so what they did, it was the half brother of my great grandfather. What they would do is they would take all of that money and they would give it to the one guy that no one would ever suspect of carrying large amounts of money, and that was a black fellow. And he was, in fact, my great great uncle there says he trusted this man more than anyone else, and that's the way they got their money back without anyone ever knowing that they had money, is because this guy carried it. He notoriously wore big baggy pants, and he would tie the money bags down around his waist, and they would kind of and he would tie the bags to his legs, and he looked like he had fat legs and so forth, but it was safe. And that's how the travelers in those days did also. They took the money and somehow would, secret it away or disguise it in some way. It was a treacherous stuff, but they did have letters of introduction so that once they got to where they were going, then it made sure that it went to the right person. And so that's what Paul is talking about there. And in here he says that, whatever it takes, if I have to go back to Jerusalem, then yeah, I'll go with them. These people can go with me, and they can still carry the money out. I don't need to carry the money. They can just go with me. And so, but it hints that he is, he really wants to make another visit to the people. Now, I think there's a couple of things that we could probably learn here, though, that this project, it was a good project. And so the idea that if you have a project within the body of your local congregation or whatever, and it's a worthy project, and it's got proper theology behind it as such, then what Paul was doing in here is saying that this is just kind of a matter of fact thing. This was not a great and grand fundraising deal, where he had show and music and band and all that kind of stuff. No, it was just a weekly deal. Every day you put a little bit of money into the tzedakah box, and over time it grows. And so there was no pressure, no gimmicks, no emotion. There was a need that had to be met. And certainly the Corinthians, who were wealthy, were capable of playing a great role in that need. And so, today we have these big campaigns for money. And, even within our movement, there are times where you go to these conventions or whatever, and it's just every night they have another deal, another pitch to raise money. And I think part of it is because there really isn't another mechanism within the say the MJAA for raising a lot of money for this project that they have in Israel. But just the day-to-day thing from just regular old people who are little by little from what they have, they're going to they're participating. And so Paul expected this out of those. If you call yourself a disciple of the Messiah, that's what Paul expected people to be generous and to contribute. So let's go ahead. Any comments or questions? Okay, in verse 5, but I will come to you after I have passed through Macedonia, for I am passing through Macedonia. Perhaps I will stay with you or even spend the winter so that you can help me on my journey wherever I go. For I do not wish to see you now just in passing, for I hope to stay on with you a while if the Lord permits. But I will stay on at Ephesus until Shavuot, for a great door is opened wide for me, though many are in opposition. Now, this would this when Paul went to Corinth and founded the congregation in Corinth, it was on his second missionary journey. All right. His first missionary journey, he just basically went up into Asia Minor, and he never got over into Greece and Macedonia and Achaia and so forth. But so it was his second missionary journey, and I think I've got a map on here. Yeah, here's the map where he had gone from down here in Caesarea and down to Jerusalem, and then from Jerusalem on up to Damascus, Antioch. And this was kind of Antioch was really the hub of the new messianic movement, because Jerusalem was under such pressure. So a lot of them settled up here in Antioch, and from there he worked his way through Asia Minor, and then up on into Macedonia and down to went to Thessalonica, to the Berea, and then you remember he went to Athens, and basically they were not friendly to him, and he finally just threw up his hands and said, "That's enough, I'm leaving." And from there he went down to Corinth, and he stayed in Corinth about 18 months. And so that was during his second missionary journey. And so now he's over in Ephesus, and he's planning his third missionary journey, and that he said he wanted to come there and maybe spend the winter there. And why would he do that? Well, it's not because it's such a great winter holiday place, but because the shipping lanes, the winds were from the wrong direction in the wintertime, and they could not really use the ships, and with the sails and so forth that they had back in those days, they had a lot of just these big old square sails or something. They couldn't sail real close to the wind, and so shipping was just kind of it was a seasonal thing, and you didn't go in the wintertime. It was just too nasty. And so anyway, Paul is still over there and this is where, on his third missionary journey, where he actually he started in Antioch and went up through Asia Minor and into Macedonia and so forth, and then he just basically backtracked his way until he gets down to the southern part of Asia Minor. But anyway, so that's when he actually did finally make it back to Corinth, but it was still a while before he did that. So he said he was going to stay there until he was going to stay on in Ephesus until Shavuot. Now, what was Shavuot? That's that's the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. It was also the giving of the Holy Spirit to the believers in Jerusalem. That was credited as being like the start of the modern messianic movement, or you could say the start of the church, the birth of the church of the Messiah, the body of Messiah, and so that's when that began. And so he said he was going to stay there in Ephesus until Shavuot, and then he's going to go on with his trip. Now, there's some speculation as to, well, if he was mentioning Shavuot, does that mean that these Gentile believers and so forth were actually following Jewish customs and celebrating the feast and so forth? And there are some that said, oh no, he wasn't doing that, because what he meant by Shavuot was Pentecost, and that's when the Holy Spirit came, and that was a thing separate from Judaism, and so that's what he was waiting for. And because Shavuot is one of those, one of the regalim, that's one of the required feast of the Lord that they were supposed to go to Jerusalem for. But here he was up in Ephesus, so obviously he couldn't just pop into Jerusalem. And so, and anyway, he says, I got some great opportunities here in Ephesus. He stayed in Ephesus a good long time. And he was, a lot of places were open to him. He was preaching the gospel. But at the same time, for every time that Paul was successful in preaching the gospel and getting people to become believers and so forth, there was tremendous opposition to him. And so he doesn't really tell us anything about what was going on in this letter. You have to go back and read the book of Acts, where Luke tells kind of tells the story a little bit about what was going on with Paul and his struggles in Ephesus. But he didn't want to leave Ephesus right now, because he's got something going, and the congregations they were growing a little bit, and he wanted to just drive this home while he was there. Then let's go on then. In verse 10, now, if Timothy comes, see that he has nothing to fear among you, for he is doing the Lord's work, just as I am. No one then should treat him with disrespect, but set him on his way in shalom, so that he might come to me, for I am expecting him along with the brothers. All right, now what we see here, you look by that, and where it says, if Timothy comes, well, Paul knew that Timothy was coming, and so it wasn't so much of a case of, is he going to come or is he not going to come? It was more of a case of whenever Timothy gets there. That's more the Greek connotations in there are more like that than the idea that he may not come at all. It's no, he's coming, but I just don't know when, because the travel back in those days was not like it was like it is today. Because back in those days, you set a schedule by the season, and you pretty much made it in the season. Nowadays, you go to the airport and they'll cancel your flight in a heartbeat, and so there goes all your travel plans. Well, really, they did that in those days too, because have a storm come through, they can't sail, or bandits come through and you have to hide, or whatever, and your horse breaks down, and those same kind of stuff. And nothing is new. And so Paul is just saying, look, whenever Timothy gets there, see that he has nothing to fear among you. Now, why would he say that? Well, because these Corinthians had been real stinkers, and they were in opposition to Paul in so many ways, that he had a genuine fear that these people would be against Timothy. Even though Timothy was not a stranger to them. Timothy had been there with them during the when Paul was there founding that congregation. Timothy was there the whole time, so they knew him, and so there was nothing in that regard. But Paul was afraid that you guys, he didn't actually come out and say it, but he was thinking, these Corinthians, they have been real stinkers about what they believe, and this and that and the other, and it's much in opposition of Paul himself, and so he was afraid of that. And so then he says, make sure that he has nothing to fear among you. Why? For he is doing the Lord's work, just as I am. No one then should treat him with disrespect, but set him on his way in shalom, so that he might come to me. I'm expecting him along with my brothers. So Paul says, look, make sure you take care of Timothy, because he is doing the Lord's work just as I am. Okay, there's no difference. He's telling them that Timothy is my man on the job over there in Achaia, and you should treat him with the same respect and deference that you would me. Now, also involved with that is Timothy was a much younger man than was Paul. And so, they might not have treated him with the same kind of respect, but Paul is asking them to do that no one would disrespect him, that would set him on his way in shalom. And what that meant, to set him on his way in shalom, is another way of, okay, and I expect you to take care of him financially and send him on his way, because he is vital to me and my work, and he needs to come to me. So you fund that and send him on his way in peace. In other words, pay for his trip on for the furtherance of his missionary journey. So, comments, questions? Okay, now, he says, about our brother Apollos, I strongly urged him to come with you with the brothers and sisters, and he was quite unwilling to come now. Let me kind of get back and, put the emphasis. He was quite unwilling to come now, but he will come when he has an opportunity. And so if you look at that, you think, well, what in the world? Why is Apollos saying he didn't want to come? Well, I think it's part of it was, remember when at the beginning of the book of First Corinthians there, part of the congregation, they said, well, we're of Apollos, because they got saved when Apollos was teaching there. And others said, oh, we're from Paul. Some said we're from Peter. And then you had the real religious group that says we are from Yeshua. And so everybody, there were factions within the body. And so part of it, I believe, was Apollos was an upstanding guy. He was the kind of guy that would look at this and say, yeah, I don't know if I want to get back into that hornet's nest there, and you just have to put up with that sort of stuff. And also, to Paul's credit, he could have looked at Apollos as being a rival, and a lot of teachers and rabbis and preachers and people like that, they get into this mindset of competition between the various congregations. If you ever have been in ministry, it doesn't take you very long to figure out that, okay, there is a lot of competition between these various congregations and churches and stuff like that. And so, people have just remarked to me, says, how in the world can you tell somebody else that's coming to your congregation, or they're trying it out, or they ask you about your congregation, and you ask them, where do they live? And then when they live far away, you point them to a congregation that's closer to where they live. And, that doesn't make any sense. You're trying to build your own congregation. I said, no, I'm trying to build the body of Messiah, period. And if a person will go to a local congregation, that's okay. It's one that teaches the right thing, then, I will point them in that direction, because I want them to be involved. And if they're close and they don't have to drive an hour and a half to get to our congregation, they're going to be more involved. And so that to me, that's much more important. I think that's kind of what Paul is, his deal here is, doesn't matter. And so he says, yeah, you want Apollos to come. And evidently that was what it was in their letter that, Paul had received, that they wanted Apollos to come back. And he could have said, no way, Jose, I don't want him to be in competition with me. No, he said, yeah, okay, let's do it. And he urged Apollos to come back over there. But Apollos said, no, not now, not right now. I will not come right now. But later on, when I can, I will go. So, and they just, they let it go at that. And Paul was very gracious in asking Apollos to come, and then explaining that he didn't give a real good reason or an answer for it, but he says he's not going to come right now, but when he does, he will come when he has the opportunity. Okay, so Then going ahead, we have some further instructions. And it says, be on the alert, stand firm in the faith, be men of courage, be strong. Let all that you do be done in love. So Paul is giving some instruction, the conclusion of his letter. And normally the standard for it, there was a format, hortatory remarks. Okay, now hortatory is a big fancy word. What does it mean? It means words of encouragement or exhortation or building up. Those kinds of things. That's what hortatory is a that's a theologian's word. And so I thought I'd throw it out there for you, and you could take hold of that, use it sometime, and win a game of Jeopardy or something. And so, but he starts out with that. He's got these words of exhortation, and why we see that in the Old Testament too. What were these words sometimes that we see in the Old Testament that be on the alert? It says, be men of courage, be strong, hazak, venit hazek, and be strong, let us be strengthened. And so here he's saying, be strong and be on the alert, because he had told them certain things that were going on in their congregation. And maybe, perhaps some people, they didn't even pay that much attention to it or whatever. The old thing about there's three kinds of people in the world: that people that make things happen, people that watch things happen, and people that says just, hey, what happened? And so he's telling them, let's be on alert and then stand firm in the faith. Don't wiggle wobble. Stay firm in the faith. Don't kind of get drifted off into some of this, say, Hellenism, or some of the feel-good doctrines and so forth that are out there. And be strong, be courageous, stand up for what's right, is what he's telling them to do. And then, but in verse 14, he said, whatever it is that you're going to do it in love. Okay. And so, yeah, be strong, be firm and all that, but make sure that you do whatever you're going to do it in love, and be nice, play nice, children. That's what he's telling them. Now, there is one thing here that you notice, that in most letters of the day, there is a wish for peace. They would say, and we would, the idea of a peace be with you, brother, and peace be with you, brother, and that sort of thing. And you'll see that it's not anywhere in this letter. Paul is not telling them, okay, I wish that you would have peace. I think what he wanted a little bit of that hornet's nest to stay stirred up there, that he stirred up, to start working and getting these people off of top dead center, so that they would not be so tied up to their culture, and get back into the word in a greater fashion, in a deeper fashion. And so he's not telling them, and I wish that you would be in peace, because he didn't want them to be in peace. He wanted them to get back on track as to what they were doing, and not be complacent, and be in peace, with he just wanted them to get going. So he didn't tell them, let's be peaceful here. And so he said, now I urge you, brothers and sisters, and then he has a parenthetic here, the household of Stephanas, and that it is the first fruits of Achaia, and that they have devoted themselves to the service to the Kedoshim, also to submit to people such as these, and to everyone working together and laboring. I rejoice at the coming of Stephanas and Fortunatus and Achaicus, for they made up for your absence, for they refreshed my spirit and yours. Therefore, acknowledge such men. All right. So Paul is telling them now, he's got a little parenthetical that he's stuck in there between his hortatory remarks, his words of exhortation and uplifting, and and then also with his words of caution. He sticks this in there, but he has to put in this little parentheses. The house of Stephanas, that is the first fruits of Achaia. And so he's reminding them that these guys are the pioneers in that area. They have been believers for a lot longer than you are, and they have devoted themselves to the service of the Lord. And they had used up their resources, their people, and it said they had devoted themselves to the service of the Kedoshim, the saints, the holy ones. And so he's telling them, I want you to submit yourself to these people. In other words, these are people who have tried, they have been tested, they've been proven. And so they are people that you should be molding or patterning your responses to things, your life after, because they've got it. They know what it took, and they know what it takes to be in right standing with the Lord. They know what it means to be a follower of Yeshua. And he says, submit yourself to these guys. They have the wisdom, they have the experience, and they've got the temperament that is required. And if you will follow them, you'll do well. And so it's these men, Stephanas and okay, where's my notes? Fortunatus and Achaicus. They were the ones that brought the letter from the Corinthians to Paul in Ephesus. And so then he's writing them the letter back to them, and then they would take it back home to them in Ephesus. And he said that in your absence, or in other words, they came as a representative to you. Not everyone in Corinth could get on a boat and sail over to Ephesus, where Paul was. These guys came as their representatives. And so he says, and these guys made up for your absence. And that was not a derogatory term. That was just a case that said, well, we know you can't come, but these guys, they were very, very helpful to us. And he said, they refreshed my spirit and yours. And so what does that mean? They refreshed my spirit and yours. Well, I think Paul is in some way there. He's being a little prophetic because he's telling these people, the Corinthians, that these three men, they came in, they have refreshed me, and I've talked to them, and we've discussed, we've just gone over and over things, and when they come back, they're going to be full of the Spirit, and they're going to be able to talk to you and bring you words, and they will refresh you too. And so he says, so acknowledge those kinds of men. That's who you should follow. Don't be following the one that's living with his father, one of his father's wives, or the ones that don't give charitably to the poor, and they have these feasts and they get drunk instead of serving other people, and these, don't follow them. Follow these kind of guys, the Stephanas, Fortunatus, and Achaicus. So anyway, let's see if I got any of my notes. Okay, going ahead. Any comments or questions so far with this? All right. Now, Messiah's communities in Asia greet you, Aquila and Prisca. We would say, from the King James version, Aquila and Priscilla. But here in this one, they say Prisca. greet you warmly in the Lord with the community that meets in their house. All the brothers and sisters greet you. Greet one another with a holy kiss. All right. So Aquila and Prisca are among the the companions. We know a little bit more about them. Okay. They were what? Fellow Jews and tent makers. They first met Paul in Corinth, and you'll see that if you want to go back to Acts 18. Then they accompanied him to Ephesus. Now, Priscilla and Aquila, they had actually been believers up in Rome. So I mean, they were long-term believers, had a lot of experience. They were kind of wealthy, and so they had moved down to Corinth for business purposes, I guess. And then they helped Paul establish that congregation, and then they went on down to Ephesus with him, where they again had a congregation meeting in their own home, and that was the norm back in those days. And that because there are lots of reasons for that. Well, number one, there weren't a lot of strip malls where you could go in and rent out a little store someplace, and plus in some cases it was maybe just not safe or practical for people to get together. And normally these groups were small. They were not the big, you had no mega churches in the first messianic assembly of Ephesus, with 5,000 people. No, it more probably would be something like maybe 40 or 50. And they would meet in the home of someone who had a large enough home, and generally these would be people of some means. And so they eventually went back to Rome and had another house congregation, kitchen table group. And then even later on, then in another letter, we find them back in Ephesus. So they traveled a good bit with wherever they needed to go, whatever the Lord had for them, they were able to travel, and possibly they were traveling because of business concerns too. But they were all over, and they were in Corinth and Ephesus and Rome, and so they helped with Paul, and they were very influential and valuable to the early congregation. So. And there's one other thing there. The holy kiss. What in the world is a holy kiss? Well, they say that back in those days, that was a way of greeting. Now I was reading one guy there. He says, well, the holy kiss back in those days, people, that would meet someone and, they were affectionate towards someone, and they would kiss each other on the lips. And, of course, that just, for me, they just gave me chill bumps. Okay, I don't do that. But, I've been in parts of the world where you meet someone and you put out your hand, and of course, then you lean over and they lean over and they do the little mwah, mwah on either side of you and of your face. And if you're lucky, they don't touch you, that sort of thing. And it's funny. I have a very dear friend from a kind of a different culture, and when he meets me, it's like he gives me this great big old bear hug, and I mean he slaps a big old kiss right on the side of my cheek like that, and on purpose, because I think he knows it makes me uncomfortable. But anyway, but that he's just a genuine, loving person. And the fact that he's an evangelist also just kind of proves that. But that was a kind of a custom, and we've lived in Latin American countries, and where you meet people, and you can in polite society, and then you do the side, the one side and then the other side, little kiss, but it's not really a kiss. It's more of you know, emotion. I guess it's not emotion, a motion that you do. And so that was the holy kiss as such was okay. You do that because you do that with people that you know or respect or honor or whatever. And so that's a big deal now. Why? Because the Romans, I mean the Gentiles and the Jews, they had not been together that long, and a lot of times, if the Jewish people look down on the Gentile people, and so now Paul is saying, no, let's um, um, yeah, Charles Carmen's husband said, yeah, that's an air kiss. Yeah, that's right, and um, and so but they would by doing this, it tells the Gentiles that okay, we're being accepted into this Jewish community, and it's also for the Jews to say, we can no longer exclude these people because they are believers. They are our brothers and sisters. That's where the idea of the holy kiss, because we're all under Messiah. There's no Greek or Jew. There's no male, no female, no free man or slave. We're all the same in terms of salvation before the Lord. So that's what that holy kiss would have meant. Now, Paul goes on to say that he's greeting in his own hand Paul's. Okay. Back in the day, he would have a scribe who was good at writing all that stuff down. And a lot of people did. Because they would be thinking their thoughts, and then you'd have a scribe, and he would write down your thoughts. But then at the end of the letter, you'd kind of put a little postscript down or something, and Paul would write and see how big my handwriting is. And some people said that's because he was blind. Well, I don't know what his deal was. He says, see what big handwriting I have. I says, and it may be a case that one of these days, in the far off future, there will be a guy named John, and his last name Hancock, and he's going to have a great big signature like I have. And somebody said, well, some of Paul's letters, there was indications that people would send out letters in Paul's name. And so by him putting his big John Hancock on the bottom of the letter, that made the letter, it verified that this letter was from Paul. And so now the next thing he comes up with, it says, if anyone does not love the Lord, let him be cursed. Maranatha, for our Lord come. The grace of the Lord Yeshua be with you. My love be with all you in Messiah. Okay, now here's the deal here. This idea that the curse, that is so un-Pauline. Okay, Paul just didn't do those kind of things very often, and he didn't, he was not that kind of guy. And so this was very, very unusual for Paul to say something like that, and especially in the closing of one of his letters. In fact, this is the only time. And so I think what this is, the Greek word, the Greek word that was used for this curse is something that you may have known. It's anathema. Okay, something that is, it's, let's say, persona non grata. Just an outcast or an exile in some cases, depending on the context. And so he's saying, if you're not part of the body, then you're anathema, but it's a self-imposed one. So that's kind of where he's going with that if you're not with us, then you've chosen not to be with us, and just go do your thing. You be you, but don't mess with us. And so then he follows that with Maranatha, meaning the Lord come. And we run the letters together, Maranatha, and meaning come Lord Yeshua. And so in that case, with you can look at it and say, yes, he was being that's kind of an eschatological prayer for Paul to say, yeah, Lord, come, it's time. Please, let's start this messianic kingdom very soon. And that's a cry that all of us should be looking for, and looking for him to come one of these days. And so then he finishes out his letter with the grace of the Lord Yeshua be with you. Now that is strictly a messianic sign off, because you wouldn't see that in a secular sign off in the rest of the world. The grace of the Lord Yeshua be with you. And then finally, another unusual thing for Paul, verse 24 there, where he says, my love be with you all in Messiah Yeshua. It's almost like, okay, I've said all of this stuff and I have beat you up in this letter because, you needed it. And this hurts me worse than it does you, and all of those kinds of things, but then at the end of it, he, in my mind, he looks like he's kind of softening it up a little bit and just letting them know that, hey, I'm telling you all of that to you in love. I do love you in Messiah Yeshua. Now, of course, it's also the other way too, where it says, my love be with you all in Messiah Yeshua. Says, I don't really like you very much, but I have to because of Messiah. Now, maybe that's the cynic's view of that, but I do believe that Paul was sincere, that he genuinely loved these people, and he wanted them to do right, and he wanted to do right by them. So that concludes the lesson. That concludes the first book of Corinthians.